Blah blah blah, cold open, mumble mumble, something snarky about people being mad at video game critics, yakety schmackety, veiled self-aggrandizing, mock acknowledgement of one's own smug superiority, blah blah, brief sliver of humanizing introspection immediately undercut by reappearance of crippling persecution complex, make-believe heavy sigh for effect, pithy trisyllabic segue, and iris out to titles. In all seriousness, though, my acknowledgement that arguments held on the internet over movements that exist on the internet for or against things that only the internet cares about, not exactly being the ideal of democratic discourse that Themistocles fought for at the Battle of Green Screen, does not preclude my additional acknowledgement that a man with a big mouth should endeavor to also have big ears, and that the fundamental law of averages holds that even the tornado hitting a sewage treatment facility crap storm that all internet arguments eventually descend into, if sufficiently sized, can manage to toss around a few ideas worth taking into consideration. What I'm electing to zero in on here today is one component of the myriad grievances supposedly held against the geek media and the gaming press, mainly because it's been one that cropped up before the most recent unpleasantness. The idea that there's entirely too much talk of politics in geek culture and around video games in particular. Now, to be fair, much as I appreciate picking apart any narrative art piece for a way to tie it to this or that high-minded hot-button issue as a thought exercise or even just for kicks, I can also concede that it can be tiresome reading yet another analysis piece about a game or a film or book or song or comic or whatever that is clearly more interested in showcasing the author's expertise in a particular field or tradition of cultural critique regardless of the logical stretching required to get there. That's not to say that you can't fill a library with in-depth examinations of race and class in Grand Theft Auto 5, or that there was nothing to be said about gender, sexuality, and also colonialism or cultural appropriation in the new Tomb Raider reboot, or even that it's not going to be really interesting to see how that new Hells Yeah, militarized police are awesome version of Battlefield is received, if we've still not sorted out that business in Ferguson by the time it comes out. But if you're looking for a Marxist manifesto between the lines of Bubble Bobble, you may want to re-examine a few of your life choices. But I can't get too on board with the idea that discussion of games is either A, somehow too invested in matters of politics, and or, God forbid, social justice, or B, should actively be avoided altogether unless a game comes along stamped with a Republican or Democrat endorsement sticker. Politics, or simply issues that have a political dimension, isn't simply a made-up bugbear of cable news. Just about anything that has value or draws interest has a political dimension simply by virtue of existing within a culture. And even if you don't want to dwell on them, you can't very well pretend they aren't there either. For example, the film Brokeback Mountain never actually featured anyone turning to the camera to speak explicitly in favor of gay rights. It was mostly a basic doomed love story that happens to involve two men. But the simple presence of homosexuality in a society has been made the subject of controversy, so the politics of that controversy were inseparable from that film in that moment in time. Now, on a much less serious note, the Smurfs have often been described as an idyllic representation of a functioning communist society. On the other hand, DuckTales is one of the strongest endorsements capitalism could have asked for. The Flintstones and the Jetsons both satirize suburban nuclear family consumer values using cartoon exaggeration. There's an obvious immigration parallel to the stories of Mork and Mindy, E.T., and Alf. Do you think the characterizations of the Middle East in Aladdin would be different if they made that film after 9/11, Afghanistan, and Iraq? Probably, right? Would it surprise you to know that some folks read The Little Mermaid as being a pretty functional metaphor for transgender identity? Superman's moral coda was once to fight for truth, tolerance, and justice, but it became truth, justice, and the American way in the 1950s, when we were very much worried about the patriotism of superheroes. And on the subject of superheroes, what is one to make of Batman? Is he the free market ideal of the clever capitalist who will use his limitless wealth to find a creative solution to the social ills of crime? Or is he an obscenely wealthy crybaby buying himself a license to beat up poverty-class henchmen and the mentally ill in order to feel better about childhood trauma, even though Bruce Wayne could probably eliminate violent crime all but completely from Gotham City by putting a factory or two there, and putting every remotely able-bodied citizen to work there for a living wage and benefits. See also Uncle Scrooge McDuck. Wouldn't it make more sense for him to just hire the damn Beagle Boys as security troubleshooters or something? Okay, maybe not so much that last one. Oh, but video games are different, I hear you say. They're interactive, so the narratives are often broad and arch in order to allow for a more immediate immersion by the player, who will bring enough of their own perspective to the experience so as to make an in-game theme secondary. Well, okay, but a lot of the time the theme is still there regardless, and I don't mean just like how Modern Warfare franchise was inherently political because it involves real-world armies and was clearly willed into being to slake the Western and in particular American need for some semblance of control, if not catharsis from Middle Eastern military conflicts in a post-9/11 world, or the historical business in Assassin's Creed, or the various things at play in Gone Home, Papers, Please, and other insistently topical indie releases. No, those are the obvious ones. I'm talking more about stuff like the brutal criticism of directionless social and sexual immaturity among Western and Eastern otaku culture inherent in No More Heroes' characterization of Travis Touchdown, or the fact that the famous reveal of Samus Aran being a woman in the original Metroid being a surprise in the first place says more about the place of gender in society than a lot of the series' later attempts at characterization did. Mega Man can easily be read, at least in part, as a cautionary tale about allowing day-to-day life to become so mechanized that a single man could threaten the world simply by being the one who masters the machines. Sonic's conflict conflict with Dr. Robotnik is definitely about not experimenting on animals, whereas Duck Hunt is unambiguously not against duck hunting. Hell, I mean, think about this. The most famously joked about simple story in video games, Rescue the Princess, also means implicitly restore and preserve a monarchy. Princesses Peach, Daisy, Zelda, Daphne, Tomato, etc. are the political leaders of their respective kingdoms after all. So it's kinda there regardless of whether or not you think Shigeru Miyamoto or Don Bluth are secretly monarchists. By the same token, Mike Hager is an actual politician, and in making him a player character in the Brawler Final Fight, implicitly suggests that heavy-handed tactics are in fact the answer to street crime and gang violence, and did not deploying the bad dudes to rescue the president from ninjas state a clear and unambiguous support for that administration to maintain power? The bad dudes don't appear to be Secret Service agents or military personnel, so it's not like they aren't allowed to say no to the job. And how come the Angry Birds don't really act anything like birds apart from laying eggs? Lumpy, misshapen things flinging themselves across borders, knocking stuff over, and feeling like they're accomplishing something? Are we to be reminded of the joint overextension and domestic gluttony of, say, the later Roman Empire, which, you'll recall, had a bird as its insignia? Or maybe we could take them as a metaphor for another more recent society symbolized by birds, but now more popularly known for roundness, anger, and long-range bomb-tossing, one that's grown so comfortable and directionless at the top that it can no longer even be bothered to maintain its own mythology, instead glomming onto the trappings of consumer nostalgia in a desperate quest for identity that can only be slaked by further and further. Okay, so that's exactly the kind of overreaching nonsense I was talking about at the beginning. Look, genuine pretentiousness is one thing, but a distaste for that shouldn't turn you off looking at things you like more completely and fully. You can't really divorce most things completely from any deeper meanings or readings or influences on or from the broader culture. Or, at least I hope you can't, because otherwise I've made 203 episodes of this show based on a massive fallacy. I'm Bob, and I hope that's the big picture.